So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Diana Prieto. I'm the Associate Vice President for Human Capital. We have a bit of a crew joining this morning with 3 topics. So the first we want to touch on very quickly is due to the changes in the tax law that became effective January 2018, we want to talk a little bit about taxation of moving expenses. That'll be a quick one. Then we want to touch on I-9s, and we definitely want to talk a bit about the non-tenure track and the changes that have been made in Oracle and the talent management system in connection with the non-tenure track proposal that passed last April in Faculty Council and then approved by the Board of Governors in May. To join me this morning, Dave Leathers from Business and Financial Services. Thank you very much, Dave, for being with us this morning to talk about moving expenses and the taxation of moving expenses.
Okay, well, it's no surprise. On December 22nd this last year, Congress passed a new tax law, and at that time, they took away all benefits for moving. Okay, so what's important to know is that if you do any hiring right now, and you're going to reimburse people for their moving expenses, it's important for them to know that these amounts will be added to their W-2. These amounts can be either paid directly to the person or on behalf of the person, like to a moving company. So we don't want any surprises when people get here on campus and go, well, I didn't know that was taxable. So we just want to give them a heads up front.
And the reason we're talking about it this morning is that there has been a couple of very unpleasant surprises for a couple of new hires. From an HR perspective, the way it's working is the taxation, whether reimbursed to the employee directly, the new employee directly, or to the moving firm, is happening through the pay advice, so through pay. And it needs to happen by the end of the calendar tax year. Part of why we're talking about it this morning is we only have a few more months in 2018. So if you know the new employee that has moving expenses, if they would please put the paperwork through now, and we can work HR through payroll. We will work with a new employee to spread that sum of money through as many months as we can as remain in the year in order to absorb that taxation, because it can be a rude awakening for a new employee who has anywhere from $7,500 to $10,000 worth of moving expenses. Joanna. Thank you, Joanna. Great segue. Appreciate that. The language that you see below here, and remember this will be on our webpage when we're done today, soon after we're done. BFS and HR worked with Dan Bush, and this sentence has been added to offer letters right in the 3rd paragraph about moving expenses, and I'm going to read it given the folks from back. Please be aware moving expenses are taxable to the employee through their pay advice in the calendar year in which they are either directly reimbursed or paid to a third-party vendor. This is our effort. Hopefully all of our new hires will read all of the offer letter, and this is our effort to let new employees know who are receiving reimbursement for moving expenses that this taxation will take place. Yes.
Just for so often we'll in the requisition for the PO will be created, and that might be under the 5,000, so say 3,000, and it's an automatic PO that's generated, and then later on the invoice comes in and it's paid. So how does that mechanism translate to this? In other words, how would payroll know that we paid $50,000?
So the question is, repeating the question for those of us joining us through the phone, the question is really has to do with the logistics of how the information is conveyed to know the amount of the taxation. And on this question, I am going to turn to Dave and possibly to some of the folks from HR to speak to those logistics.
So basically what happens now. Let's say if you have taxable travel, right? Travel captures it, and they relate it to payroll. That's exactly what's happening now. AP is going to capture it, and it's going to be going to payroll.
But we handle getting reimbursement employee very separate than paying the vendor directly. That's a direct bill paid, and that was never part of my understanding. But the request for reimbursement to the employee, which would happen.
Okay.
I'm not
So
gonna-
you're saying the direct pay to the, how that's going to be handled?
Yeah.
It's going to be handled behind the scenes by AP exactly the same way.
They will report to payroll.
Yeah. So it's not your responsibility to be AP's responsibility.
Can you define AP?
Accounts payable. Okay? They're looking for those types of things. Lucky them.
So in essence, it's happening in the background. You don't need to worry about reporting the amount so that accounts payable within BFS and HR will communicate about those amounts. What we would ask that you take away today is that it's taxable. Please work with your new employees to have them be aware it's taxable. Let them understand it's taxable within the calendar year and that they certainly can communicate with payroll, and we will work with them to spread it out if needed. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Dave.
Yeah, and if they
Appreciate
have
your
any
time.
questions, please have them contact me. I'm there. They're more than welcome to call me, and I'll be more than happy to talk to them. Okay?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Next topic, I-9s. Melissa Morgan, Manager of Records, is going to talk to us a little bit about I-9s.
Thank you, Diana. So we're going to talk a little bit about I-9s and Equifax. We've had the system for about a year and a half now, maybe a little bit more. So we thought it would be a good time to give you some reminders about what needs to happen in there.
Melissa, speak up the chat.
I can try, yes. So obviously, when you have a new employee, a new hire, you need an I-9, or if someone has had a break in service, this one day will require a new I-9. When not to complete an I-9 is maybe not as obvious. So if someone is changing to a new assignment without a break in service, or if you're doing a re-verification, please don't complete a new I-9. Or not locating an I-9 in the Equifax system. So if any of these things aren't clear to you, and sometimes it is a little bit tricky to tell if these apply, contact records or student employment, depending on the type of employee, obviously. Excuse me. So completing section 1, and we're going to touch on section 1, section 2, and re-verifications, and we're going to skip over large swaths of information. We're just going to touch on those aspects that have been a little bit tricky for some. So section 1 must be completed no later than the first day of employment. So really try and hit those compliance dates. Note that the employee is prompted to complete the SSA 1945 in Equifax. They can't continue, they can't submit their section until they do that. So please don't ask them to submit a paper copy or fill out a paper copy. We get those in records from time to time. You don't need to do that. And also the employee has the option of printing out their I-9, but we don't need that. So if they do bring that to you, just tell them that they can keep that, or you can shred it for them. So sometimes if an employee is a foreign national, they may not have an SSN yet, Social Security number. So make sure they don't enter all zeros or a payroll control number or anything like that in the Social Security field. They can leave that field blank and still complete the I-9. It's not a required field anymore. Or they can check SSN applied for. So it's up to them. Just make sure they're not putting anything other than a Social Security in there. So if the employee does select SSN applied for, they do need to, that will need to be updated within 90 days. So you're going to see their name with an S next to it, and then a red S, and then an S red and bold. So let the employee know if you see that they have selected that they need to contact you as soon as they get their card. They do have 90 days, but they should be doing it as soon as they get that card. And then schedule a time to meet with the employee when they do let you know. You do need to have them come in, sit down with them and look at the card. Make sure they're entering that correctly. And where that is when you pull the employee up, it's right in that corner. And then you just enter it down there. And
Is that what we enter, or do we have them to go in?
you'll be there with them. You'll be pulling, they can't get back into the system, so you'll need to sit with them to do that.
It'll let you do it, and then it asks you to sign it at the bottom as the preparer when you update it.
Right. Yes.
What happens if that isn't?
Yes. The question was what happens if that isn't done, and it will just stay on your dashboard as a task that needs to be done. So now we're on to section 2. Before you get started on section 2, remember you have to meet with the employee face-to-face, in person. Skype is not okay. They can't send you scans, and they can't bring photocopies to you. So the original person, the original documents have to be there with you as you're filling that out. And you can't specify, I think most people know that you can't specify what the employee can bring in, but instead provide them that list of acceptable documents. That's in Equifax as well, so they can look at that there. So section 2 has to be completed by the 3rd day of employment. So again, please do try and meet those compliance dates, or we're going to ask you why that didn't happen. Yes?
Can the I-9s done before the appointment? Can we do
Yes.
it a few days before?
Yeah, you can do it as soon. The question was, can the I-9 be completed before the employee's start date? And yes, you can do it as soon as there's been an offer and they've accepted the job offer. You can send them section 1. So please do, when you go to complete section 2 with the employee, make sure that you review the information that they've entered in section 1. And you do that here where I know it's hard to read, but it will say review change section 1 information. So click on that, and if changes need to be made, again, the employee will need to initial off on those. Questions about that? Yeah.
And try to make.
Yeah, that's what I was saying, that if you go in and make a correction, it makes you sign it as a preparer, because you've made a correction.
That's fine. There's no place for the employee to, oh, okay. I'll have to look at that because that is what my understanding was actually. So I'll look at
Just
that.
send you through the system. Just
Okay.
keep continuing through, they don't do anything.
All right, good to know. All right. Other questions about that?
I think they can go back to section 1 on the other screen and change information.
And then that's where they
That's
initial
where
it?
they would change it, yeah. We have that happen.
Yeah, there's 2 different places to correct screen 1 section.
Yeah, but the employee themselves can go in and change the information if it's inaccurate.
Okay. Okay. And they get to it through when you log on to section 2.
So
Because,
you know how we send out the other link for the employee to go in and enter all of their information? It's on that screen to go back into if they haven't closed it out. And
oh, if they haven't closed it out. Okay, yes, thank you. Okay, that's where I was getting confused. Right, okay, thank you. Other questions about that? So here, going back to those acceptable documents, you guys have no problem understanding what they need list A or B and C. So, yes.
We had something recently where someone came in, his visa was expired and his passport was expired, but he hadn't updated the I-9.
You can't use expired documents when you're, okay, yeah.
Okay.
And
that was for a re-verification,
for a re-verification, that's okay.
even if the passport and stuff was expired.
Yeah, because you're not re-verifying their identity, you're just re-verifying their work authorization at that point. Yeah. So yeah, it just has to be valid initially when upon employment. The important thing here is to remember, don't make copies of their documents, please. I know this happened just yesterday. I received copies of documents for 3 different employees. And it was just a copy of a passport and some other documents for 3 different people. I didn't know where they worked. why I was receiving them. So please don't do that. You don't need to retain them. We don't need them. Okay, you just need to review them. So documents not acceptable to complete Section 2, any social security card that has a work authorization restriction on it, and it will say not valid for work authorization on it. You can't use those for Section 2. Birth certificates, they have to be issued by the state, county, or municipal authority or U.S. territory. They can't be hospital issued birth certificates. Those are just more keepsakes from the hospital. They're not legal documents. So if you do see one of those, ask if they have their state, county, city birth certificate. And of course, again, no photocopies. They have to bring you the actual document. Hire date, a word about hire dates, they have to match the employment date in Oracle. If the date changes, you can go in there and update it, but they have to match. You can update Equifax. And the way you do that is just search the employee, click on change hire date, and you'll get a message that was completed. Make sure you select continue when you do that. If you just hit enter, it's going to take you back to the previous screen and not record that change. So the employer review page, this is where you check off that you've verified everything to the best of your knowledge and it's all correct. So do take a moment to make sure that it is all correct, especially noting, again, you've already reviewed Section 1 that the employees completed. Check their work status. Sometimes our foreign nationals will check non-citizen, what is it?
Non-citizen state of alien.
Thank you. Because they just see non-citizen and they think that's what they need to check. And you'll rarely see those, so make sure that they're checking the right box there. And re-verifications, those have to occur prior to the work authorization expiration date. Late re-verifications lead to interruptions in pay and work status or employment status. So again, if you can't locate the employee in Equifax, don't complete a new one, contact records or student employment. And note too that I-9s are still being uploaded into Equifax for re-verification. That's been intentional. We're kind of doing rolling uploads there. Complete only Section 1. So the employee shouldn't be sent any links. They shouldn't complete Section 1. You shouldn't complete Section 2. And again, we already touched on this. We're not re-verifying identity, just their work authorization. So you shouldn't need to see their passport. So of course, you don't need to re-verify citizens, non-citizen nationals, and lawful permanent residents. And this is where it's talking about the non-citizen nationals. You see that check. Sometimes you're rarely going to see those. So if someone brings in foreign passport, an I-94, and a DS 2019, you can be pretty confident they're not a non-citizen national. They should be checking box 4. So these are the typical documents you see for re-verification: DS 2019, I-20, and the EAD, and an I-94 with an admit date. If you get an I-94 that doesn't have an admit date, you can't use that for re-verification alone. And this is probably the #1 issue that we see with re-verifications. And if you take away nothing else about re-verifications, please remember that there's been an uptick in these that we've seen. So if they do bring you an I-94, it's acceptable if it has an expiration date. If not, you need to ask for them to bring in an additional document. Yeah.
So we had a question from the video conference. They said, should we also contact records or student employment for the employees who show up in our queue who don't belong in our department?
Yes, yeah, that's fine. I don't know why that happens sometimes, honestly, but yeah, that's happened on occasion. Yeah, definitely let us know. Questions about this? Yeah.
So we
Christine?
can't get the I-94 without an end date as long as we have the updated I-20 or DS-29.
Yes, you can accept the I-94 without an end date if you have the DS 2019 and I-20. Yeah.
Once it's done,
Yes, that's manual.
so is it like a couple days?
Those, I usually run those right before payroll so I can capture everybody. And so it's 2 to 3 times a month before each payroll run, biweekly and monthly. So that's a good question. If you do a re-verification, you're not going to see it in Oracle. In most cases, the next day it's not something that integrates in. Hopefully, we're moving in that direction. Yes. Yes, I mean, yeah, I would like to do it as often as I can. During the summer, at different times throughout the year, there's more happening than other times, so it's kind of difficult to run that report more frequently. But yeah, I can try to do that, certainly. I would like to do that, yeah. Mm-hmm.
New employees, I noticed that in Oracle, their I-9 just says pending,
Mm-hmm.
and will that ever change to have something else in?
The question is about pending I-9s in the system. So those are usually for citizens, right? U.S. citizens that you see that. Again, that's something that we're planning, or I just haven't run the report yet if it's not for a U.S. citizen. But that's when I'm running that report and entering end dates, I do try and change that to yes and enter the end date. That doesn't happen as regularly with U.S. citizens because they can still get paid while it's pending, and those are harder to catch as they're coming through. But yeah, it should change, and that's another thing that we're working on integrating too, eventually. Other questions about this? So again, these are just the common types of documentation you'll see for J1s, F1s, H1B, and F1 OPT and temporary protected statuses. If you get extensions for any of these reasons, CAP-GAP, H1B, portability, STEM extensions, contact records, or student employment for guidance on those. They can be tricky and confusing, and they're often documents you're not used to looking at. So just let us know if you are in one of those situations. And we already spoke a little bit about this, Oracle updates. They're updated manually before each payroll. If you do need something updated before that, because the employee can't access something else, or because they are returning employees and you need to enter them into Oracle and you can't do that since they have expiration dates, just let us know and I can do those sooner. So some takeaways and then we'll finish up. Meet with the employee in person, see their original documents, hire date, and the date on the I-9 and in Oracle. They have to match. If the employee selects SSN applied for, they have to come back and see you to complete that, fill that out. If they leave it blank, they can come back. They don't have to. It'll just remain blank. That's okay, unless it's needed for E-Verify. Please don't make copies of documents. We don't need them, and you shouldn't keep them. Don't complete new I-9s for re-verifications. I-9s or I-94s without admit tell date need additional documents. And if you can't locate an I-9 in the system, let us know. Any other questions? Yes, Christine.
As far as when they've applied for Social Security number and we put in a control number, when they go to update it, we just send that to this to Tal, right, and then she will update that.
Yes, not, it doesn't happen in Equifax, though.
Okay.
Yeah, there are two separate things that are happening there. Yes. Go ahead, yeah.
I'm having trouble with the search.
Okay.
Like, do you have any tips or tricks about that search? We leave the higher for the whole date, that blank.
Yes, and you should leave that blank.
Okay.
That will help with your search. So if I'm searching somebody, I'll blank that out and I'll mark both active and terminated just so I can catch
And I can
everybody.
do the first name.
I think you have to enter,
Last name.
yeah, I think you have to enter something in the last name.
Okay, well, I'll try it.
Yeah.
And sometimes those get transposed.
Yeah.
Right? So if you put in the first name, if you can't find it in the
Yeah.
last name, put in the first name, because sometimes people switch it.
Yeah. Try different combinations if there are multiple names also. Does that help? Yes.
I have a large number of employees who are stationed out of state, out of town, and I have a lot of researchers who are local, but they've already started on their first day somewhere else, out in the field. So I do a lot of remote agent processing, and I noticed your presentation doesn't speak to that. Is that kind of a rare thing?
For some departments, they never use them. Other departments use them very frequently. And I didn't touch on it because I haven't seen a lot of issues. Are you experiencing a lot of issues?
Well, it's kind of funky. The CUPA
Mm-hmm.
thing that provides people who are registered remote agents, or
Yes.
whatever they call them. That's handy, but so usually I just take a snip of that page based on the zip code and say which one's closest, and then I contact. But sometimes that list is a little out of date, and then I'm out of options, so I have to cold call, and that's really funky sometimes because a lot of places are like, you do what? And you want me to what? I have to clear that with my boss and blah blah blah. And now we're already like beyond, we're out of compliance.
Yeah. It's helpful if you can find somebody or ask the employee for assistance in finding somebody that they're working with, a supervisor out there or somebody else. That's
So are there rules about who can serve?
There are not.
Okay.
You can appoint anybody to do that. Be careful about, make sure you're confident that they're going to do it correctly, though, because you ultimately are responsible for that. So can somebody's spouse or neighbor or friend do it? They can, but just be wary about that because it comes back to us here. Yes.
So a question from the video conference is, can we do that? So I'm not sure if they're meaning, can they personally be registered remote agents, or can we use registered remote agents? It just said, can we do that?
They have to be set up through HR, if that's the question, the remote. Yeah, I guess I'm confused by the question too. So if they want to.
So if anyone has questions about registered remote agents, they just contact you.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, and do provide, I know sometimes these things are done last minute. If you can allow a little more time for us to set those up, that'd be appreciated. That's all I have. Here's some resources. These slides will be up online, so if you want to click on any of these. I use I-9 Central quite a bit. A lot of times when you guys ask me questions, I'm going in there and making sure I'm giving you the right answers, so it's a good one. Anything else? Or I pass it over to Nick.
Thank you, Melissa. Appreciate it.
I do have one more question.
So is it the student employment services or financial aid who's doing that?
Financial aid.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Melissa. So Nick is joining us, but not to talk about Time Clock Plus. So let me share a little bit of background. The non-tenure track proposal was several years in the offing, and the committee in charge of the non-tenure track proposal did a really nice job of doing what needed to be done in order for it to pass the faculty council last April. And then it was approved by the Board of Governors in May, as I mentioned earlier on. What that has meant is that there are some changes, some significant changes in the non-tenure track world. the summer has been a period of time where HR and Dan Bush and the Provost's office have been working to try to bring about those changes. And I know that there is some confusion, and we're hoping to give as much information as we can this morning. Dan was unable to join us today. He's out of the office this week. We kept this as a topic item for today because we're in early to mid-August, and you're going to have a lot of people coming through. And so we wanted to provide what we could. I hope that you all received, we tried to send it really broadly, that you all received the document from Dan Bush in the Provost's office and then the document from us last Friday. They were sent to the HRMS listserv, so I hope you have those. If you don't, please let us know and we'll get them to you. Dan provided a document from the Provost's office perspective, and then we provided a document from an Oracle, an HR OEO Oracle TMS perspective on what all this means. So Nick is going to share some information about this, and then I'm going to chime in as well. We got some questions in the last few days that give us an understanding of what some of the hot topics are, or the areas where we don't have as much clarity, or where we would like to share the clarity that we have. And so do know that some of what we will share with you today, we're able to be really certain about. And then there are other pieces that aren't ours. They're about the Provost's office, and we'll share with you what it is that we know. Before Dan left last Friday, we had a flurry of communications with Dan trying to nail down as much information as we could. And so we'll share that with you. Thank you, Nick.
Thanks, Diana. Okay, before I begin, just if you're in a non-academic department, then just take a moment to appreciate that you don't have to deal with this. But don't rub it in. I think Dan was wise to skedaddle right after sending out that communication. But really, we've done what we can to accommodate in HR and in OEO the new changes that this non-tenure track proposal involves. The first of which is pretty straightforward. They've added two instructor-type classifications for non-tenure track faculty, master instructor and senior instructor. And if it's a non-regular appointment, then also professor, associate, and assistant are non-tenure track faculty as well, of course. And so these are now active both in the TMS and in Oracle. Well, I'll get to that later. The other new fields that we're dealing with, that's not a new field, but the new field that we included is this non-tenure track faculty appointment type. And this is not to be confused with special, temporary, regular. That's the employment category, and that's now shifted to the background for non-tenure track faculty. That's no longer official in terms of appointment type for non-tenure track faculty, and they're now going to be one of these three. And what these three mean is detailed in the non-tenure track faculty manual, and so I'm not going to go into detail on it here, but they all now have to have one of these designations. Yes?
This screen is for brand new non-tenure tracks that are being appointed, right? If they're being reappointed, that's going to be in the change.
That's correct. To repeat what was said for those on the phone, what is being shown on the screen here is the additional assignment details from the assignment screen in Oracle. So if you're going into maintain person and you're creating a new assignment, this is where you're going to see that. It's what we affectionately call the beer mug field, right? And so on the assignment, I didn't include a snapshot, but it's also now on the assignment change screen. That was activated sometime Monday afternoon. Yes?
And we enter that when we're entering the new assignment.
That's correct. You enter this when you enter the new assignment.
And will this information be on the offer letter then?
This information should also be on the offer letter, correct, Diana?
So in connection with offer letters, we'll share what Dan shared with us. Any offer letter issued after the Board of Governors approval of the manual changes, May 3, 2018, that are not compliant with the new ranks and appointment types must be rewritten to reflect these changes. So any offer letters that are being created now, please have this information in those offer letters. And so I'm going to cut to a chase, if you don't mind, Nick.
Please.
Our thought to you, because we've gotten several questions about and we recognize the quandary and appreciate it. Our departments haven't yet defined the criteria for the classifications and who they wish to place on what appointment type. I see nodding. We get it. We get it. Our thought to you is the following. Appoint the person as instructor and appoint the person as continuing. And wait for your department to then define the criteria that will apply within your department or the college. Some colleges might wish to do this across the college. So that just points out the great unknowns, right? Because this work hasn't yet happened, but yet we have to turn it on now. So appoint as instructor, because you can always go to master and senior easily. But if you appoint at master or senior and you want to bring someone back to instructor, you've got to go through the Office of General Counsel. That's considered a demotion. So you'd have to go through the Office of General Counsel. So go low because it's easy to go high. Don't go high if you aren't yet sure that that person should be at one of those higher classifications because it's hard to go back low. And then appoint as continuing if the person is not temporary. That's your best bet moving forward. And any new offer letters, please do include this information in new offer letters that you're creating now. So I hope that helps.
Yeah. And to be clear then, any offer letters written after March of 2018?
May 3
May 3.
of 2018.
Okay, thank you. This is what the field looks like in the TMS. It's under the tenure track question on the faculty position. And it's the same language, same everything. It's not a required field on the position from a technical standpoint. It's not doesn't have a little red asterisk next to it making you choose it, but you must choose it for non-tenure track faculty in order to have the position approved. Okay, so make sure that anything that's going through TMS now does have that chosen on it. Yes. Great question. Integration of field at later date. So integrations with people admin are tricky, which is a kind word for it. And so we want to take our time and make sure that that really works. We're in the middle of working on it. But yes, we are going to integrate that field. Right now, what happens is that you choose it in TMS, and then when it gets to the submitting it for approval in Oracle, you have to choose that field again and just make sure that you're choosing the same thing. We're going to have some checks and balances to make sure that it happens. But just like you go in and you enter the supervisor, for example, you're going to enter this field as well. And then we're going to work on the integration. Great question. Okay, so employment category. Again, we are retaining the employment category because we have to. It feeds into benefits. It feeds into a lot of other employment buckets that we put people in. So temporary and special and regular are no longer, well, not regular, but temporary and special are not official non-tenure track faculty types, but we still use it. We still use it in Oracle to identify who gets what in terms of benefits, leave, et cetera. And so here's a little graph. I hope that you can see this, but essentially, if it's an adjunct appointment type, then it's going to be a temporary employment category. Those two go hand in hand always, okay? And then if it's contractor continuing, both of those fall under the employment category of special. So these are not official. You won't find this language anymore in non-tenure track faculty policy. We just use it in Oracle, okay? Any questions about that? There's some logic in Oracle to help guide you if you happen to pick the wrong thing, and we'll also be looking at it when it comes through workflow actions, but just be aware of this, please. Yes?
So you can be a faculty title below 50% and hold special, so we just need to do all of that and the changes will be.
So the question is, right now, if you're a special faculty member, you can drop below 50% and remain special. That has changed with the language in the new policy. So if you drop below 50%, you must also change the person to a temporary at the same time. Those changes can be made directly. I'm looking at Melissa here. Those changes can be made directly in Oracle and do not require a TMS action. Everybody got that?
And it's okay to go back and forth from temporary to special?
I don't know. I mean, yes, it is in that it's allowed. I don't know if there are circumstances where that won't be allowed. That's kind of a provost question. Does anybody have any more details about that?
Well, if they increase their FTE again, then they can be switched back.
Correct. Yes. So if you increase the FTE again, then you can be switched back. What I don't know is if there are reasons why they can't go back and forth between these. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah. So this is one area that does not have clarity.
Clearly.
Dan is aware. We had a couple of questions, particularly from a couple colleges, about fluctuating FTE. Fluctuating FTE is challenging in the HR world. Dan is still trying to figure that piece out. So we'll work with it the best that we can. Certainly the way it works now in terms of temporary and special with regard to benefits and so on will just fluctuate back and forth, and we'll continue to work with Dan to try to figure out how that's going to look moving forward, because we know that there are fluctuating FTEs for certain areas within certain colleges. We don't have the answer this morning.
I guess, urgent. If it's not clear department, the next Oracle action is a record. Are they going to be looking for anything where they approve? And we just don't want payroll held up, so maybe that might just be a verification issue. Does Dan have to be involved in an FTE change? I mean, it's all of that kind of stuff we don't know, but we're trying to now push these things through, mainly the reappointments are right now.
Melissa, do you have any comments there?
For current employees, it's my understanding that's not gonna change.
Yeah.
Still, you know,
Even if you're changing from state specialty.
Go ahead and put those reappointments through now. The FTE fluctuation, and so the other bit of news that I'll share is Dan is considering that if there's going to be any change to FTE, that it has to go through him for approval. I'll share that with Dan. Because the theoretical is one thing and the practical is another. And I think this is one where the two maybe don't meet very well. And I'll share that with Dan. But so for right now, with reappointments, consider this a fresh start. Place folks into the system at the current FTE that you believe they will be working at, and then if there's any need to change that, we'll have to figure that piece out.
I have some more urgency too. We're trying to put in some audit numbers out. And now the field is showing up on the summer session assignment to choose.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a change for the particular person, but the 9 months hasn't changed yet. So we don't want to blow up the system. So my question is, are we okay? We have to answer something.
Yeah.
It's a force field. Are we okay on the summer session assignment audit to make the change, even though it won't match the 9?
Yes. So I want to repeat some of the stuff that's been going on for the people on the phone. Two main concerns: reactivations, reappointments for the fall, and also those summer session assignments. It's okay to have those things happen at different times, and to have it on the summer session and not have it on the 9 month yet, that's not a problem. And I know that it's a little bit weird to have that be a required field already. And believe me, there's a lot of discussion about it. It was decided, no, that this has to be required immediately, and we're just going to kind of muddle through it for a bit. So I kind of jumped ahead a little bit here, but if you're reactivating people, just reactivate them as instructors. Unless your department is somehow totally solid on what you're doing, and you've already gone through TMS with these classifications, then you could start thinking about master or senior instructor, but I would assume that 99%, if not 100% of the departments are going to be just wanting to use instructor for now, and we'll deal with the mass changes later, which I'll get to in a moment. And then if you're switching between temporary and special, or just choosing for a reactivation, choose adjunct for temporary because it has to be. So if the person you were going to rehire them as temporary, just choose adjunct. And if you're reactivating as special or changing it to special, just choose continuing because you have to choose between continuing and contract. Right? Yes.
And just to clarify, on the continuing, there is no option for equipment in, is that correct, in the system anymore, Scott?
There should be.
It does say the appointment end date.
Yeah. We had some discussion about appointment end dates, and there is language in the new non-tenure track faculty manual about there has to be one for adjunct. There can't be, wait, what is this?
There doesn't have to be one for adjunct.
There doesn't have to be one for adjunct. It's a choice, right? But in Oracle, you do need one, correct? No? Okay. Sorry. Yes.
From Dan, it says,
Continuous.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
Right. And I think that there's some confusion out there because, especially in the research areas, we use appointment end dates specifically that match with when funding ends. So there's some concern about automatically moving to continuous because that takes away some flexibility and some security that we'll need in being able to end those appointments. And so I want to just throw that out there to be aware of it. And then secondly, that moving to a contract is not the solution. And I think some department heads believe it is, because that's where the appointment end date in their mind exists, is with contract. But moving from continuous or special to a contract is a legal agreement. And I think we need to make sure that people understand that that's not the way to go in order to be able to use an appointment end date without going through truly rewrites on offer letters and such.
Thank you for your comments, Christy. So I'm going to not summarize so much, but speak to it a bit. Part of why we're suggesting to you that you default to continuous for now is because a contract is a legal agreement. And if you default someone to a contract, guess what? You have just entered into an agreement that you can't get out of easily, if at all. So that's why we suggest continuing until your department define the criteria and understand what appointment and what type of an arrangement they wish to reach with each individual that is in the instructor area, or that is in the assistant associate professor non-tenure track. I want to share, because we did have this conversation with Dan and the question did come up. For non-tenure track faculty funded by grants, we should add language that the position is dependent on continuous funding, and if the grant ends, the position will be terminated. So think here about the offer letter. Okay, so terminations will remain the same in connection with financial resources. So if it's an end of financial resources, an end of a grant, an end of a funding source, we can end that employment arrangement with the individual. It would be helpful to have that language in the offer letter that is given to the individual. And then Dan added, this to be almost exclusively used for research, NTT faculty. Okay, so the world does not change when it comes to funding source or when it comes to performance. It will be the same approach. If it's about funding source, though, do know that what will need to be demonstrated is if there is a group of folks who are working on this project, why is this particular person being selected to end their employment? So those questions are still going to be asked. But again, when it comes to funding source, grant funded particularly, funding source, and when it comes to performance, we will proceed as we have been proceeding in the past. Any questions about that? Yeah.
A question regarding the line of demarcation. I just want to make certain that if we're reappointing someone that worked for us last year I can still bring them in as a temporary because that's the line of demarcation. This fall forward, or are we having to go retro? So if I had someone for temporary, last year they worked for the entire year, then must I bring them in as continuing? Or because now effective was approved May 3rd, so it's effective fall forward, then can I bring them in as a temporary, have them for 2 semesters, and then have to move them at 50% of higher?
I don't think temporary is defined that.
Do you mean in terms of because they've
Because they've worked for us
because they've worked
already.
for us for
So according to the language, they would already qualify as continuing. But
right?
that wasn't effective last year, right? It's effective now. So does that mean this is the line of demarcation moving into fall? We can have them be temporary?
That would be a good question for Dan. I'm not 100% certain on the answer, but my answer to you would be, given the spirit behind the NTT proposal that passed, that person would not be temporary. They would be continuing.
So anyone that's had a year, we should,
That would be my answer, but it would be good to confirm that with Dan. Because it's not in keeping with the purpose of this proposal to have that person be temporary. Yeah.
Okay, back to the end date and for funding ending and stuff, you said we're going to do that as we have, does that mean even though funding ends and we had an end date, we still have to go through the Office of General Counsel?
Yes.
So it's still a long process.
It's still the same for now unless Dan determines that could change if it's in the offer letter. But my guess is that no, it will still have to go through OGC because any termination of an employee goes to Janine, who then makes the recommendation to Tony. Because remember, Tony Frank is the only one who can terminate an AP faculty employee. And the reason for that process. That authority is delegated to Tony.
I know it's just one there's hesitation because the need has often given us flexibility. If the end date that was noted in the system matched exactly when you were looking to end employment funding was gone for, let's say, a research associate or a faculty or whoever it might be. And there was less flexibility given and it followed more of the traditional process of moving up through President grade if those dates did not match or if there were other factors. And so I think just getting some clarification probably between Janine and General Counsel as well as the Provost's office and what flexibility or lack of flexibility will be allowed going forward.
So what I'll do is that you may be noticing I'm writing a few notes. I will compile these notes and send them to Dan and ask Dan to understand what the outcome is going to be, and then maybe he'll message it out. Any other questions for now?
I'm sorry, I apologize for being like, obviously I have to go with my stuff and building. So if I have someone who is teaching one class, like we would call in our college 25%. Like they do that for more than 1 year, so they're going to be beyond their adjunct and their temporary, but they're not going to be at 50%. Can they be at continuing and below?
No, they cannot. So the question is, if somebody's been temporary below 50 FTE for over a year, can they be continuing and lower than 50%? They cannot. If they stay below 50%, they're going to be a temporary adjunct.
Oh, so they can stay adjunct as long as.
Yes, correct. It's only if they're over 50%, I think.
That's how I read it too.
Yeah.
So if the person is always under 50%, they're continuously temporary. Yeah, that's how we read it.
Okay, I want to, yes.
And just for clarification, for senior teaching appointments, they currently have no end date, so they're automatically reappointed. Do we need to go in right now and change their status?
Do you need to go in if they're an STA? Change their status? No. If you're not, yes, but you don't need to do anything with them right now because they're going to be included on what I'm about to talk about. I'm going to jump back. Did I already talk about this one? Yeah. So for each department and or college, depending on how it's structured within your unit, you're going to be providing over the next semester or possibly 2 semesters, basically a giant list of all your current faculty, NTT faculty, where they're at right now and what the proposal is for how you're going to move all of these people into the new structure. So what is their new classification? What is their new appointment type, et cetera? And so that would be captured there. So you don't need to do anything with them right now. And then we're trying to accommodate and not have a billion actions go through the TMS and Oracle. And so what we agreed upon as OEO, HR, and the Provost office is to have these spreadsheets submitted to the Provost, have them reviewed there, have them reviewed in OEO, and then for Human Resources to actually make the updates in Oracle whenever that review ends. And so you don't need to make those actions yourselves. Go ahead.
Can I chime in with something
Please.
here next? So the effort is to try to make this as easy as possible for you at the department level. The question came up, does it have to be one spreadsheet? No, you can do it in waves. We're trying to make this easy for you, so it's not one-off. You can bulk it. So if it's not about, say, within your department decisions are made in 2 waves, you can certainly submit 2 spreadsheets. That is absolutely fine.
And the other things that we're trying to, this is a small point, but we're trying to make things a little bit easier on ourselves too. But we're going to make the classification changes in Oracle, and those are going to flow automatically to TMS. We don't have a connection for the appointment type yet, and so if you have current NTT faculty in TMS and it's just kind of a shell of a position, and it's not going to have that NTT appointment type. Even if we put it in Oracle, we're going to put it in Oracle, but it's not going to flow over to TMS, and that'll just be revisited when that position description is updated the next time by your department. Does that make sense? Yes.
Salary stuff is on-site salary.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share, Joanna, so the question has to do with if there's a need to change the salary. Can you share, Joanna, what would prompt changing the salary? That hasn't actually been a part of the discussion.
The standard pay salary on an annualized basis. And I actually had a top higher on that. Then I think I have to think, sorry, I might have temporary faculty be like given all the parameters now continually track. I'm not sure what their FTE is, that makes sense. So I could see maybe some adjustments to maintain that 50%. I haven't really thought about it.
Yeah, I'm wondering if that actually is managed through the appointment itself and not necessarily a change in salary. I was not familiar with a 40K floor. I know we're looking at a 30K floor. So I'm not. Okay.
So
that would be great.
Anyone else first?
Salary has. Actually don't know the answer to your question because salary changes have not been a part of the conversation thus far. That is a good question for Dan, and I've noted it for Dan as well.
We have been, Colin did work a lot, and everyone else has, but we have been going through a salary adjustment period for the last 3-4 years to bring everybody's instructor assignments to at least a minimum floor of 40,000.
Okay. That's a Dan question. I've noted it.
To speak to salary as well, I have a few actually been approved for STA, and with STA comes a $1,500 increase to their base salary. So I'm just wondering if that is still the case. That might be another question for Dan, or if that number is going to change. Because currently, and I actually put through an out-of-cycle request for $1,500, but if the new amount is different,
That'll be a question for Dan. So the question is about senior teaching appointments, and those are, if you read the language that changes the manual, the idea is that those will transition to one of the new classifications, either master or senior.
right?
At the same time, the language in the change to the manual indicates that it's not a forced change, although I think that the provost's office would like to see that change take place. So I don't know what's going to happen to that 1,500 or the process, because my sense is, but I don't know for sure, we'll have to talk to Dan, that process for the senior teaching appointment, the way it exists now, will cease.
Right.
Yeah.
So because they're just kind of caught in the middle, right? They did that application process last year for this coming fall, and I have 3 faculty that were approved. They got their congratulatory letter from Dan Bush, and so put through the increase, the salary increase. But I'm just concerned about what that salary increase is. What is that?
I don't think it shifts.
Anywhere.
I don't think it changes. Confirm with Dan.
Okay.
Email Dan and confirm with Dan. He'll be back in the office next Monday.
Okay.
I don't think that shifts or changes because the world was still what it was at that time, and I can't imagine that we would change that.
And I've seen a few of those signed by Dan recently come to me, so I don't think there's any immediate change to that. But
Okay.
I want to come back to a topic, which is end dates in Oracle, and that's a conversation that we are going to have with Dan, because end dates actually assist us in HR from the perspective of units don't always term appointments when people leave us. So our challenge may very well be that if we don't have some kind of end date on the continuous, for example, might we be paying folks who aren't here anymore? I see a lot of nodding. Thank you for the nodding. That's a real issue, because then we have to get that money back, and that's not easy to do. So we are engaging in, do know that end dates like FTE fluctuations are areas that we're continuing to have conversation about to try to hammer out and figure out how we're going to move forward with those two. I know we're about out of time. Any last questions? Christy.
I have a question and a comment. I just want to acknowledge you for the moment of passage. Thank you all for your willingness to help this happen in full. From a college standpoint, I'm a non-continuing track faculty, and being able to do this in a spreadsheet format really helps us out. I want to thank you and acknowledge everyone that's part of that process.
Thank you very much, Christy. Really, really appreciate that. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day, and we'll continue to message out as we learn more. Thanks, everyone on the phone. Have a good day.